All right. Praise God. Here we go. Did you change to the other? Is this still the logo? Okay. Got through the technical difficulties. And here we are. So, one of the things that I want to talk about where we are here in the transition of patriarchs is this interesting character that we run into. We're here in Genesis. We skipped Genesis chapter 25 last week. We said we were going to get to it this week, and that's where we're going to start. And then we're going to move forward. We're going to try to get all the way to Genesis 31. So this is a really challenging character to deal with. And we're going to deal with it in two sections this week and next week. And I've called it the wrestler. A lot of people like to just overlook the person of Jacob because they're like, why would you spend time talking about a guy who's a deceiver, whose name literally means, or his name means the deceiver, or like he's a liar, he's a cheater. Why are we dealing with this? Well, more literally, his name means heel holder. It's like a grappler, a wrestler, in a lot of ways. And but he definitely is a deceiver. Like, we're not going to make up something for that. But Jacob is such an interesting character to deal with here. And a lot of times we kind of skim over him, but there's a reason that in the book of Genesis you have. So we're in chapter 25 of 50. We're halfway there in the book of Genesis, and realistically there are only two people left to cover in the entire book of Genesis. You ever thought about that? Basically, the last 38 chapters of Genesis are about four people: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Those four people are covered for the last 38 chapters, 39 chapters of the book of Genesis are covering the lives of four men. And now we're going to deal with this guy, Jacob. There's so much details about the goings on with Avram to Abraham, right, to his life and what happens. And there's this little blurb about Isaac and how faithful he was. And then in chapter 26, right, we get the story about him going into the land of Abimelech. And then he dies in chapter 27. It's like this is everything we get about Isaac. Except here in the middle of Isaac's story, we get this conversation about Jacob and Esau. We're going to kind of dive into it. We're not going to read it all, but we are going to talk through the steps of the story and see if there's something here that we can't learn and figure out. So we're going to pick up the story in Genesis 25, verse 19. So this is the account of Abraham's son, Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean from Paddan Aram, and sister of Laban the Aramean. It's interesting that this is the second time that Laban has been mentioned. So he's about to become very, very prominent. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. And the babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. And after this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob, or Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. So they were married 20 years before she had a baby. We don't ever think about that. Huh? And she had twins. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was a quiet man, staying among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, it's interesting that it's like this is how they grew up, and he was a hunter, and he was quiet and stayed among the tents. And let me tell you a story about them. Once upon a time, Jacob was cooking some stew, and Esau came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." This is why he was also called Edom. And Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." "Look, I'm about to die," says the drama queen. No, that's in the Kirk Jackson version. Esau said, "What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. And then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. And we're like, so? His birthright, what does that have to do with anything? Let's talk about the customs of the day. Esau's big brother. And we've talked about this a little bit before, right? In the house of Terah, who was the oldest son? Avram. Avram was the oldest son. He was, what was the term for it? The Behor. In your Bedav, in your family, the firstborn son would be the Behor. However many sons you have, that's how many divisions of your house there are plus one. The birthright is a double portion. Not just a double portion. The birthright is this place of carrying on not only the customs, but the place of honor and the priorities of the family that have been established by the father. This is the responsibility of the oldest son. With those responsibilities comes the reward of twice as much as everybody else gets. That means, like for me, I have two sons. In the Jewish sense, I would divide my estate in thirds, and Nicholas would get 2/3 and Jonas would get 1/3. This is something like in a different conversation. What you need to understand, in my family, I'm actually doing this. I've had this conversation with my kids. They all understand. Nicholas, as our oldest child, he will get twice as much as everybody else. It's been a very open conversation we've had with our kids, and a lot of people that we know are like, "What are you talking about? That's weird. Why would you do that? Like, why would you have favorites?" Well, it's not that I have favorites, it's that I have an expectation of my oldest son. If something happens to me, if something happened to me tomorrow, my expectation of him is that he would step in and be a replacement leader in my home for his sisters, for his little brother, um, and be there to help make sure that the house perpetuates and that the direction of everything perpetuates. And so part of that is a responsibility that when I'm doing something that's new to me or I'm in a new adventure, that he's right there beside me, experiencing it, understanding it, communicating it, doing certain things, being trained in a way that one of these days he's going to take over my house, and he will get twice as much as everybody else. The difference is I'm not just giving stuff to my sons. My daughters will get a portion as well. And Lauren and I actually had this conversation earlier today that in the Jewish sense, I'm treating my future son-in-laws as if they're part of my family, as if they're my own. And so this would be a place of honor. And Esau just didn't value it. He didn't think it was important. But Jacob wanted it. He wanted that place that Esau had. He wanted that place of honor. He wanted the leverage of control and influence that position had, that position of the Behor had. And this creates a very interesting situation. Because the next chapter, in chapter 27, not 26, we've already talked about that. But the next chapter, in chapter 27, talking about the story of Jacob and Isaac, if you've been in church very long, this is a story that you know. And the interesting thing is, we oftentimes say, well, he had the birthright, so now Isaac's getting old, and he's blind, and he's struggling, and he sees the end, and he's like, I need to bless my son to carry on the family lineage. I need to go ahead and bless him, and in the Jewish sense, live as if I am dead and pass everything on to my kids because I don't know when I'm going to be done, and I want to make sure and bless them before I die and pass everything on. So I'll just live in their house and wait for the end. And here's the thing. A lot of times we associate this next story with the first story. They are two different things. Just because Jacob and Esau have already agreed to the birthright, the blessing is not the same as the birthright. But a lot of times we're like, well, he negotiated for the birthright, and now he has to go claim it in front of Dad. That's not true, and we're going to see that in just a second. So when Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called for Esau, his older son, and said to him, my son. He said, here I am. Isaac said, I am now an old man and don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your weapons, your quiver, and your bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die. Now, Rebekah was listening. And the question about this story that I have is like, when we look back on chapter 25, Rebekah asked of God what was going on inside her because she was having all this pain from all the jostling around this, like the two boys that were at war within her, literally in her womb. And the question is like, it'd be so great to have some insight to this. Like, did she say something to Isaac and say, hey, I know this is what's coming. You need to bless Jacob because God told me that the older son was going to serve the younger son, because that's what's coming. That's what this blessing is about. This blessing is not just about the division, it's about who's going to be in charge. And whoever gets this first blessing is who's in charge. The birthright is the separation of everything. This blessing is about, hey, I'm stepping out of this position of authority in this house, and I'm handing it over to somebody. And if you're choosing who that somebody's going to be, are you going to choose the mama's boy who stays at home and is quiet and is always deceitful and challenging? Or are you going to choose the son who's always doing the things that you need him to do, who's leading the flocks, who's out doing all the things, that's out in the open country? Like, Esau is a man's man, and Jacob is not. And if you had to choose between the two of them who you were going to bless and who was going to be in charge and who's going to carry on your legacy, you would probably choose Esau. But God had said from the beginning that it was going to be Jacob.
Wouldn't Isaac have wanted to bless Esau anyway because he was the oldest?
Yes. 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 Yeah. Because he's oldest, that would definitely be because he's still the Behor. Whether he gets the double portion or not, that's a decision that was negotiated over a bowl of stew for some reason. But this blessing is about who's going to carry on the legacy. And here's what's interesting. We would say, yes, Isaac would want to do that because he's the oldest, but Jacob doesn't. When Jacob gets older to bless his kids and hand things on, he has no interest and makes it very public that the oldest is not the one who's getting this. And it creates a lot of contention, but Isaac wasn't the oldest, technically. Yeah, Jacob did go to his favorite. Isaac was trying to be a man of honor. Like, this is what's interesting. Again, I'll go back to what I said in the beginning. We get so little about Isaac in the Bible, just that he's a man of character and he redeems a lot of the path of his father. And then here he is, he has kids, and his kids are like the undoing of him. But it's kind of interesting when you think about it, because like Jacob is the grandson of Avram, and Rebecca is the granddaughter of Nahor. So this son and this mom from Terah are on the same level of lineage. And the question I have is like, was Rebecca involved in this conversation? I mean, she was obviously involved. Is she involved, and does she get Jacob involved to deceive Isaac because of Isaac's stubbornness, or because of what God had told her, and now she's going to do whatever it takes to see what God's message to her was? Like, is there not like, if that's the fact, like, there's a significant amount of faith in her son and God to complete what he said was going to happen. But like, this is a very interesting dynamic, because obviously it is obvious that Jacob has had this conversation with Rebecca, right? Jacob wants so bad to be in charge. He has a classic youngest kid syndrome. Like, the youngest kid wants to be in charge, doesn't want to sit at the little kid's table anymore. I want to be in charge. Like, I want to be treated like I'm one of you. I am an adult. What is going on here? Like, this is Jacob in a lot of ways, right? And So here he is. Dad's old.
It depends. If it's just within a day or two,
Yeah.
she may not have had much conversation with her husband.
Yeah, and the question is, how long was this conversation going on? But she was told about the younger, the older serving the younger before the boys were born. And now they obviously are old enough for him to send Esau out on his own into the open country to kill something and to bring back food and like cook it. So I mean, and what you're going to see immediately after this is Jacob is old enough for him to send him out to Laban's house to go get a wife. And you're going to see that Esau already has a wife. It says that he has multiple wives, like besides the wife. It says that he goes and gets a wife from the daughters of Ishmael, besides the wife or wives that he already had. Yeah.
That might be why God disapproved of them.
Yeah, he was fine with the people of the area. Say what? Well, we are going to deal with that. And Rebecca says to Isaac, I don't want Jacob to take one of these Hittite women as his wife. Send him back to my brother's house so he can marry somebody within our family so that they can have some character like we have. Which, based on Jacob and Rebecca and Laban, this is not going the direction you would expect. Anyway, so here we are. Where did I get off? Okay, there we went. 27. So he sends him out to give him a blessing. He says Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. And when Esau left for the open country to hunt game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, Look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, Bring me some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat, so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die. Now, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats, so I can prepare some tasty food for your father just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat, so that he may give you his blessing before he dies. Man, he must like to eat. He must like to eat. Like if Esau uh and Rebecca are very aware of the way he likes to eat his food, is it like Isaac's favorite seasoning? Is that what we're dealing with? It's like Isaac's famous rub. Is that what we're going with? This is the seasoning, the way he likes to eat it. Yeah. And it just is it's an interesting thing. And again, it's such an interesting conversation because Rebecca is of this scheming generation. That's where she is, really. But is it because she's in that generation that she is that way, or is it an act of faith to see God's will accomplished? Like, this is really the question we have to grapple with in this story. And there's no real information here. She goes on to dress him in Esau's robe so that blind Isaac smells Esau. She goes on to put the sheepskin on his arms and at the back of his neck, where it says where Jacob is smooth, so that he feels the body of Esau. And he even says, Isaac even says, It's strange. It's Jacob's voice that I hear, but it's Esau's body. Are you sure you're Esau? And he says, I am. Like, he lies to him twice. He says, who is this? And he says, it's Esau, your firstborn. And he says, how have you returned so quickly? He says, your God has granted me favor in this matter, in going out to kill wild game. And so I'm here for you to bless me. And then he blesses him. And we often, like, it's easy, it's easy for us to look at this and go, well, he just said some things over him. He just prayed over him, basically. Why doesn't he, when Esau gets back, why doesn't he just give the same blessing to him? Like, why doesn't he just bless him the same and move on? But that's not how this thing works. That's just not how this thing works. In the Jewish tradition and in that tradition, he has been curating this blessing through meditation and time with God, potentially for years. He's been preparing this blessing. And now, he did prepare two blessings, but in his mind, he was preparing one for his oldest son and one for his younger son. Because he was preparing one as the one to be the lead. Matter of fact, he was preparing the first one. It says that he was prepared to give the first blessing would be rule of his household, leadership of his household, and all of his, it says all of the women, all of the people born to his other wives, which we interpret that as wives, but it's not really wives. It's really concubines. It's really women who were bearing children that were half brothers and sisters. He gave them all in servitude to the first one. And his intention was as well for Jacob, the second blessing, to be a place of that brother to stay and serve the other, serve the first. Like, this is the content of Isaac's blessing. And his intention was for it to go to Esau. But Jacob's the one who got it. And so Isaac is heartbroken when he realizes that Esau's come back and he just gave his blessing to somebody else. And it's not like he can just double up. I've already promised and blessed you to have all of these people serve you and serve your house and be committed to you. But it wasn't you, even though I thought it was you.
Was the dad angry?
After Isaac finished blessing him and Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence, his brother Esau came in from hunting. He too prepared some tasty food and brought it to his father. Then he said to him, "My father, sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing." And his father Isaac asked him, "Who are you?" "I am your son," he answered, "your firstborn Esau." Isaac trembled violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed!" Exclamation point. That's the end of verse 31. When Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, "Bless me, me too, my father." But he said, "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." And Esau said, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? He has deceived me these 2 times. He took my birthright and now he's taken my blessing. Then he asked, haven't you reserved any blessing for me? And Isaac answered Esau, I have made him lord over you, and have made all his relatives his servants, and I have sustained him with grain and new wine. So what can I possibly do for you, my son? And Esau said to his father, do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father. Then Esau wept aloud. Esau, it took to this point for Esau to really value what was to offer. Because he sold the birthright and lost the blessing because he flippantly went about life like it was given. And his father Isaac answered him, your dwelling be away from the earth's richness, away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke from off your neck. Man, that's a lot different than the blessing of Jacob. All the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of heaven's dew and of earth's richness, an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and may those who bless you be blessed. Those are two very different blessings, aren't they? That's why Esau was so upset. So then we get this process that happens. Now Jacob runs off and leaves. He gets scared and he's like, I can't stay in this place. And his mom's like, don't worry, I've got it taken care of. You get your stuff together. I'll send you to Laban, my brother's house, and you're going to stay. You're going to rest until your brother forgets about all this. Yeah, okay. Yeah, your brother's going to forget about all this. Okay. So then Rebekah goes to Isaac the next morning and says, don't let my son Jacob take one of these Hittite women as his wife. Send him on his way to my brother Laban and let him marry one of our kinsmen. And so Isaac calls Jacob in, blesses Jacob, tells him to prepare everything, and sends him off. He blessed him for his journey. So then he arrives in this random place. He comes to the land of Haran, finds himself at a well that this stone is rolled over top of it. And he's like, how do you guys water your sheep? And they're like, well, and once all the flocks are collected here, then we roll the stone off the well, this trough, this water collecting space. Let the flocks all drink, and when they're done, we roll the rock back over it, and then we head home. And he's like, well, that seems like a waste of time. And he tells him, I'm looking for my kinsman, Laban. Do you know him? And they're like, yeah, we know him. He's like, how is he? Is everything well with him? Yes, it's well with him. Matter of fact, that's his daughter coming to bring their flocks. This is something I talked about shepherding, and I'm going to talk about it again. What you have to understand is young girls in Bedouin communities and even in the Middle East today, girls that haven't been betrothed yet, that aren't of age yet, are most often the ones that operate as shepherds. They take care of the flocks. You might see some kids, like some boys like Jonas's age or a little bit older with them. That's because they're babysitting him for the day. And he is worthless to them, except for they have to keep him alive. That's pretty much it. That is true. So basically, in our family, it'd be, well, Lauren would be too old now. So it'd be Sawyer, and she might take Jonas with her sometime. Like if we were shepherds, if we had flocks in this time in my family, Sawyer would be the shepherd girl who would be responsible for the flock. I'd be terrible. And so it wouldn't be abnormal. So here's Rachel leading a flock in, and Jacob sees her. He rolls the rock off of it, brings her up, brings her sheep up to drink water. He greets her with a kiss, tells her who he is, and she immediately runs off to talk to her dad and let him know who's come. And so that hospitality is just the thing. So he's on his way in the direction that she went. She ran off. He's walking. Laban comes out to greet him, hugs him, kisses him, welcomes him, and brings him into the house and celebrates. And then he begins to serve him, and he's been there a month, and he's like, hey, you're better than one of these hired hands. You're better than this. Let's figure out what's a contract, what's a good price for us, what is good exchange of service here? What's a good price for your service, for you to stay here and work and be part of the family? He's like, well, I'll stick around and work, but I want your daughter Rachel. Well, what's a good price? 7 years. It's an appropriate price. I'll work 7 years. You'll give me your daughter Rachel. We're about to find out why Abraham was so adamant when he sent his servant, my son's not going back there. He is not staying there, not a chance. You can go get him a wife, and that wife needs to come home. This is where stuff is happening. This is the land that God has promised us. So, what do we see? Laban has a daughter, Rachel. Laban has another daughter, Leah. Names mean a lot, right, in this time. Jacob the deceiver is dealing with old Laban here, who, if you remember back to the last story of the servant coming to get Rebekah, the servant and Bethuel have an agreement, remember? That Rebekah's going to be his wife, and servant's going to take Rebekah back home to Isaac. He says, stay the night. Stays the night. Next morning, who comes to talk to servant and be like, hey, hold on, we're going to need some time? This old Laban character, he's like, we need to negotiate. We're going to renegotiate after the contract has been signed. That's this guy. Shocking, he's going to do it again. He has these two daughters. You know what Leah means? And this is no offense to anybody who's named Leah. It means tired eyes, which in this culture would have meant not very pretty. Tired eyes. That's what this would mean. She was a homely one, as they say. She was not very attractive. But this is the pursuit. She probably was a really good cook, Leah. Huh? I do not know. Okay. So Rachel, though, she is the one that they have negotiated. So here, 7 years later, celebration is happening. It's a wedding feast. Laban gets Jacob drunk. This is a true story. Laban gets Jacob drunk, sends him to his tent, sends his daughter in to lay with him so they can consummate the marriage. Evidently, he was so messed up that he doesn't even recognize who's in the tent with him. It was dark, and she was wearing a veil, and I don't know what else is going on. But it wasn't until the next morning that he realized this is not the one. This is Tired Eyes. This is old Tired Eyes. This is not what we did here. But it's too late. And Laban's argument for why he deceived her is like, well, culture. I mean, it's just in our culture. I mean, it would be inappropriate for me to give the younger daughter and not the older daughter. She has to have a husband first. And, well, she's yours now. It's like, well, what about Rachel? Well, I guess you could work 7 more years for me. Man, this is extortion is what this is. Right? And he says, fine, I'll work 7 more years for you. So he worked 7 more years. And the Bible implies that he's like, he worked like it was a day to pursue after Rachel. So 14 years, he finally gets the wife that he wanted. But in the meantime, he was still doing husbandly duties with the first wife. And they start to have kids. And what you don't understand, and maybe what we don't realize in this conversation is all of the kids of Jacob except one. One was born in Haran. Only the youngest is Benjamin. He's the only one not born there. Only one not born there. It's a long time. Yeah.
Didn't he deceive him and serve 21 years?
He wasn't done. Yeah. Okay, so they're 14 years in. And 7 years really significant. Perfection. God is at work. Here's what's really crazy. Now, there's going to be a discussion. Hey, I've worked for you 14 years. I've gained nothing except for your 2 daughters. Now it's time for me to gain something from this. He says, okay, what'd you have in mind? He says, well, your flocks are growing. God is blessing you. Everything's going well. We should divide the flocks. Okay, what were you thinking? Give me the black sheep and give me the goats that are speckled, spotted, and striped, and you can keep the clean ones, the pure ones. And Laban says, okay. Tells his sons, as soon as he comes out of that meeting, he tells his sons, take all the ones that meet this requirement that should be Jacob's, and you boys take them and take them 3 days' journey away. So Jacob's left tending the flock, and he starts looking through the flock, and he doesn't see any that meet what his are. So now there's 3 days that separate the flock that represents actually the stuff that's supposed to go to Jacob, but he's going to have to fight all of Laban's sons to get him. And the flock that is under his care and his family's care, that is still Laban's, don't meet the requirements of what this agreement that Jacob just made with Laban. Jacob the deceiver has met his match. This guy is one step ahead because he has all the leverage and all the strength. And so what does Jacob do? He does something that you're like, how is this possible? What is even going on? So whenever he'd water them, he'd put these strips of bark in front of them that were stripped and streaked and spotted. And when they would mate, when the stronger ones would mate, he would put that in front of them. And so they had a whole bunch of striped and spotted sheep all of a sudden. I don't know what this is. Is this like witchcraft? I don't understand. But obviously, it's something that God showed him. God showed him, and it goes on to talk about it later. God showed him that all of the goats, all of the male sheep, all of them were speckled and spotted, and that's not what he negotiated for. So when they were breeding when the healthier uh, goats were breeding healthier goats, he would put that stuff in front of them. But when the weaker ones were breeding, he wouldn't. So all of the big, strong, healthy animals that were having big, strong, healthy babies, they were having big, strong, healthy babies that looked like the ones that Jacob had negotiated for. You know how long this went on? 6 years. So here he is 20 years later, looking around going, I don't think Laban likes me as much as he used to. Oh, you think? I don't think he liked you before. I mean, as the world turns, he doesn't like you that much. This is like General Hospital on steroids, right? This is really bad. He's basically operating like a servant, but his flock and his camels and his servants, his house, his Beidov is growing, but it's still under the shadow of this other Beidov in this land that he's not supposed to be in. And so finally he's had enough, and he calls his 2 wives out into the field to meet him. And here Leah and Rachel are. Matter of fact, before this happens, there's this story about his kids and that were born. And it says that Rachel has Joseph, and one of the other boys comes in one of Leah's boys comes in from the field with like some flowers or something. And Rachel asks Leah, hey, can I have some of those? She's like, you took my husband and now you want this too? She's like, well, let's make a pact. Let's make an accord. What do you want? She's like, well, just give me some of those and you can have your husband for the night. Like, what are we doing? Jacob is being prostituted by his wives between them. They're negotiating who gets to sleep with him tonight based on what the kids bring in from the field. Like, that's exactly what happens. Anyway, and then she ends up being pregnant again. That's how we get Issachar. Anyway. So this is the dynamic. There's really like these Leah and Rachel are sisters, and they don't have a good relationship, but they go out and meet Jacob out in the field. And Jacob says, hey, I don't think your dad likes me as much as he used to. Oh, okay. And he's like, so we need to leave. So we need to pack up our stuff and be ready to leave. And you tell me if you're coming with me or not. And they respond to him and say, well, my father's cheated you and he sold all of our stuff. And everything that was going to be ours, he's spent. So whatever God has blessed you with, he's blessed you with so that you can care for us, and we're with you, and we're going to go wherever you go. So they get up and leave. And we get this crazy interaction that happens because they get about 3 days ahead of Laban, and Laban realizes, hey, they've left, and he's mad because something else happened in that process of leaving. You remember when we talked about Avram said, hey, go and get my son Isaac a wife, don't let him go. And when Avram left, do you remember one of the things we talked about? He left his father's house. One of the things he left behind? They're gods. You know what happens when you hang out somewhere 20 years and you have a wife that's been there all her life and you're like, hey, it's time to go. And she's like, okay, let's go. I'm just going to pick up a couple things to remember this place by. Dad's gods. It's a really good thing. I believe that's what, in the this story, it implies that that's how, that's what makes Laban angry. Is his gods are missing. And this wife who he loves, Rachel, she's the one who's got him. And Jacob genuinely has no idea what's going on. And so it takes 10 days for Laban to catch up with Jacob. And he finally catches up to him, and he's like, "What have you done?" He's like, "What do you mean, what have I done?" He's like, "You left, and you took my stuff, and you're stealing my daughters, and you're stealing my grandchildren." Like, what are you talking about? This is mine. Yeah, we're in 31. Yeah, we kind of skimmed over 30. There's just a lot of, hey, this is where the kids were born. And so, yeah, there we go. And so, this whole back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And finally, Jacob's like, "Hey, go through all my tents, go through everything, and whoever's found with your stuff, you can kill him. And then whatever you find and whoever you find it with, bring them out here and we'll stand together and we'll figure this out. You can take them back with you." But Rachel is the one who took the gods and she put them on the sack of her camel. And now she's put it under her cushion. And Laban looks through Leah's stuff, looks through Jacob's stuff, gets into Rachel's tent, and Rachel's sitting on this cushion, and she says, "Father, I would get up, but I'm on my period." Not a joke. That's exactly what she says. This is like the most ridiculous. And so he is fine. Yes, Rachel said to her father, "Don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period." So he searched but could not find the household gods. And Jacob was angry and took Laban to task. "What is my crime?" he asked Laban. "What sin have I committed that you hunt me down? Now that you have searched through all my goods, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine, and let them judge between the two of us. I have been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring your animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself. And you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for the 20 years I was in your household. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac, had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you." So verse 43 is where this interaction comes to a head, and it is a really weird thing. They're going to try to resolve this conflict between them and to have resolution between the two of their families. In the Middle Eastern culture, you don't eat with anybody who you don't have a good relationship with. If you don't have a good relationship with them, you just tell them, "No, you're not welcome here." Send them on their way. Matter of fact, in the New Testament, they would literally, if you're approaching and you were outside and they didn't want you around, they would literally use the word repent so that you would turn around and walk the other direction. You're not welcome here. That's not welcome here. Repent, turn around and go the other way. So Laban answered Jacob, "The women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine." He's like, "I made you who you are." He's like trying to take the position of God. Again, why Abraham wanted nothing to do with Isaac going to stay with this woman. Like, if Rebecca had said, I'm not coming, Abraham was like, she's not the one. You can stay there. If you don't come back, I'll send somebody else after a different wife. Like, this is not how this is going to be. All you see is mine. Yet what can I do today about these daughters of mine, or about the children they have borne? Come now, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as a witness between us. Okay, let's do it. Let's make a covenant. Let's rectify this situation. Let's eat a meal, and let's move on. You go your way, I'll go my way. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. And he said to his relatives, gather some stones. So they took stones and piled them in a heap. And they ate there by the heap. And Laban called it Yegar Shahadutha, and Jacob called it Gilead. They're not even calling it the same name. It's really unity happening here. We are unifying the family around using different language. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. That is why it was called Gilead. It was also called Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other. This thing has so many names. Definitely gives you the inclination that, hey, things are going well. This is a father and a husband and wife going, I think we should name the child this. Nah, I like this better. Nah, I like this better. Nah. It's like a back and forth of who is going to be in charge here. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives besides my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me. What did Jacob say in response to that? He said nothing. You remember in the past, in leading up to now, we'd hear so-and-so said, and they'd say something. And then they said, what did we say that meant? There's a pause in the conversation. So Laban makes this declaration, and he's waiting for, like, we're making a covenant here. We have set up these stones as an altar, as a place for there to be a covenant between you and me. And I'm making a declaration of my side of the covenant, and I'm waiting for you to respond. And Jacob's like, okay. And, and then it says, Laban also said to Jacob, here is this heap, and here is this pillar I have set up between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So they made a So Jacob puts a stone out, and everybody brings stones, and they make this heap. They eat this meal together, make this covenant. They decided what they were going to name it. Then Laban's like, well, I'd like to, you named it Gilead, or Mizpah, because it says, may the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other. And he's like, you know what? That's okay. That's cool. I'm not okay with your God. I'm going to build another, hey, we built this altar and we made this covenant, and you said it was because of your God. So I'm going to go ahead and make this other pillar over here beside this heap of rocks and make sure and make a commitment with my God involved too. And you know what they do again? They eat another meal. So Jacob took an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac he offered a sacrifice there in the hill country and invited his relatives to a meal. And after they had eaten, they spent the night there. And early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them, and he left and returned home. So there are 2 meals. There are 2 meals eaten, 2 different altars basically built, and 3 different names for the place. This really speaks of reconciliation. Matter of fact, if you understand the context of what's going on here, after the conversation, after the declaration, and after the first meal, everything else that Laban says is in Aramaic. And everything else that Jacob says is in Hebrew. They're not even speaking the same language anymore. We're here to reconcile differences. Nothing got reconciled. It sounds like there is something that is a mess. This deceiver is refusing to give up his deception. Because Laban doesn't know any better. And the reality is, this is the culture that Jacob has grown up in. Like his formative years as an adult and his dealing with other people and being responsible for his own house has all been about deception. That's all he knows. And I would argue that the root of it starts with his mother. And the question that we have to wrestle with is, why would God use this guy? Because we're going to get to this next week, but this man's name is literally changed to Israel. The people of Israel, like we talk about, reference them as the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, or the Israelites. They all have their source back to this guy. They're not the Abramites or the Abrahamites. They're not the Isaacites or the people of Isaac or the people of Abraham. No. They're the Israelites. Nowhere in the New Testament do you see God recognize himself, or later on in the Old Testament, do you see God recognize himself as anything other than, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. He never leaves him out. This man only knows how to deceive and to grasp a heel. Why this guy, God? There's a certain desire in him that isn't in his brother. See, we get lost we think that conflict, like especially in our modern day marriage context, people are in hardship and they're in challenging times and they're like, well, we just fight so much. Well, listen, if you're fighting, there's still hope. If you're fighting, there is passion and desire there. And that's where Jacob is. There's passion and desire. There is a fight. There is a desire for something better, for something more, whatever it takes. Now, his methods are questionable. And that's what leads him to Laban's house. But there's a fight there. God can change the methods, but he can't give you passion. That's in you. Where Esau is apathetic, and he sees this blessing and this glory of God that's been handed down from generation to generation and now sits in his lap, and he despises it. He doesn't honor it or value it or do all the things. Do you think if Isaac had been challenged by God to take Esau up the mountain when Esau was an adult, that Esau would have carried the weight and gone up there and willingly died? I don't. I think the answer is no. So Jacob, while he has all these failures and people like to overlook him because of his ways and his scheming, there's a reason. And there's a reason that God continues to use him. It's because God can correct methods. He can't create passion in you. A desire and a burning passion has to come from within. And so we're going to wrap this up. We're going to have a few more conversations, but I mean, I really want you to see what is going on in this context. And we're only about halfway through this conversation about what's going on with Jacob. We're going to finish the rest of Jacob's life, this grappling that he's doing, this wrestling that he's doing. And he's going to go from wrestling with his relatives to wrestling with God. And that is going to transition his way of understanding what he's doing and what he's going through. So I'm so grateful that you joined us. If you joined us online, consider joining us in person, 10:30 on Sunday morning. And you can give through the link that's in the description of the video. Really grateful. We're going to get into small group time now. And